All right, welcome back, everyone. So, just a little bit before the inauguration now. Again, I'm going to be heading to Washington for the inauguration. I'm going to be doing some interesting reporting. I think you'll like tomorrow, going around and kind of showing what the Capitol looks like. We'll be hopefully having that out tomorrow or early on the 20th. We'll have to see. And also, of course, there's not only going to be the Biden inauguration, but Trump is going to be holding an event in Florida at the same time. And so I'm going to be making an effort to get you folks a broadcast from both the Biden inauguration and from the event in Florida. We'll see if we can get both. We'll have to see if YouTube, lets us publish it at this rate. But yeah, wild times we're in. All right, folks, good seeing you all here. So a few different stories tonight. I want to go over first of what's been happening in Washington, and then go into some of the other issues with tech censorship, where things are at, and then a few other updates as well, if we have time. Yeah, good seeing you all. Steph, good seeing you. Anna Victoria. Yeah, thanks, everyone. Bonnie S. Coy, thank you. All right, folks, jump into the first story for the day. As always, if you have questions, leave them in the comments. I'll try to get to them. And let's go through the news. So first of all, this is Epoch Times. The Department of Defense and FBI are vetting National Guard members in D.C., according to the Pentagon chief. Now, it says here, Pentagon Chief Christopher C. Miller confirmed that National Guard members who are stationed in D.C. will see expanded vetting by the Department of Defense and FBI ahead of Inauguration Day. Now, this is according to Miller, who is the acting Department of Defense Secretary, in a statement on Monday. He said, while we have no intelligence indicating an insider threat, we are leaving no stone unturned in securing the Capitol. And he noted that it's a, quote, normal process for the Department of Defense to, quote, vet National Guardsmen who are in Washington, D.C. He continues stating, this type of vetting often takes place by law enforcement for significant security events. However, in this case, the scope of military participation is unique. The D.C. National Guard is also providing additional training to service members as they arrive in D.C. that if they see or hear something that is not appropriate, they should report it to their chain of command. Now, of course, this is a bit different because what they're being vetted for is like who they voted for in the election. In other words, this isn't normal vetting of, let's say, inherent bias or some kind or radical views. This is vetting based on which candidate they voted for, based on the belief being touted that if they voted for Trump, maybe they're a security threat. This is where things are heading with it. Now, going a bit deeper into this, the reports over the weekend saying that the FBI was helping vet National Guard's members, Miller confirmed those rumors. And he said, we appreciate the support of the FBI in assisting with this task, and for each of the more than 25,000 guardsmen who answered their nation's call. Now, Army officials and other authorities said that up to 25,000 National Guard members will be stationed around D.C. around Inauguration Day. Photos and videos show a heavy guard presence, along with non-scalable fencing and concrete barriers around key buildings such as the U.S. Capitol, Supreme Court, and other areas. And as we mentioned, Mayor Bowser is saying this is the, quote, new normal for Washington. Have to see how D.C. looks after all this. So what you have right now is you have a massive troop presence, up to, again, they've been increasing it, 25,000 currently, and who knows if they'll increase it even further, who are being vetted based on their political views, based on concerns that even the troops themselves may be a threat, allegedly. This is the concern they're having, calling for this. Again, and here's the thing too, is if you talk about discrimination, someone mentioned discrimination. If you talk about discrimination, in New York, for example, I've actually covered human rights trials on human rights abuses in New York. Discrimination can be race, it can be creed, it can be, your religion. Creed in this case could be your viewpoints. This is discrimination based on based on political viewpoint, which is kind of becoming the norm in society because they've redefined whiteness and white nationalism as essentially being not based on skin color or even based on being some kind of ethnocentric worldview, but instead based on the types of narratives they've come to frame as being part of a political system that they dislike, that they tried to frame as advocating those views, even though really it's not the case. And so you've had a redefining of what radicalism is, and a very large concern, mostly on the Democrat side now, publicly stating their concerns of security around Trump supporters. Again, they're using what happened on January 6th as being their excuse for that. And so this is the current state of things in Washington. Again, folks, I'll be heading to Washington tomorrow, and I'll be doing some reporting on the ground. Michael Yon, you might remember, he's a wartime journalist, combat journalist. I'm going to be going around Washington with him, doing some reporting on the ground, figuring out what's going on. I'll be getting back to you all on that. Now, let's go over a couple more stories, and then I'll go over some questions. Next up, we have a tweet here. This is from the U.S. Marshals. They said Chief Lamont Ruffin from D.C. District Court swears in 2,000 National Guard's troops as special deputy U.S. Marshals prior to the upcoming presidential inauguration. What does it mean that they're swearing them in, right, is a special deputy U.S. Marshals? It means that 2,000 of them are being deputized, meaning that they can carry out civil arrests, which is kind of bizarre because this is not just security now. This is martial law now, because the troops, the martial element of the society, are able to engage in the law process, the legal process, and they're being deputized. You have military soldiers being deputized. Now, this is an interesting way of doing it because they are deputizing troops and allowing the military to serve the role of police, essentially, without calling it martial law. And it's quite bizarre if you think of it from that standpoint. Essentially, they're putting in martial law using the process of deputizing them rather than calling it martial law. Now, let's move on a bit with this. Now, a bit more on this again. This is Epoch Times. 2,000 National Guards troops in D.C. sworn in as special deputy U.S. Marshals. And it says here, Chief Lamont Ruffin from the D.C. District Court swore in 2,000 National Guards troops as special deputy U.S. Marshals prior to the presidential inauguration, according to the federal law enforcement agency's Twitter page. And it says the deputation gives the guardsmen temporary, limited law enforcement authority pertaining to specifically to the safety and protection of the inauguration and related events. Yeah, wild times. Hey, Jimmy Ling, thanks as always. Really appreciate it. You're saying, why are all the National Guard needed to be vetted? In my opinion, that the illegitimate election person is feeling very insecure about his office term because of no or little support from military, as well as the people as compared to what support Trump gets. So Biden did publicly state that he was concerned about the political bias, not just of the military, but even of the Secret Service. And it's strange behavior from him, this distrust of both the military and of the Secret Service, coupled with the mainstream media attack on Trump supporters themselves, coupled with Pelosi putting in metal detectors at the Capitol building and saying she's even worried about other Congress members being a threat to her, coupled with the fact that big tech is basically going on a censorship spree, going after anybody they disagree with ideologically. You have what is either a crackdown ideologically based on political viewpoints in the U.S., or you have a handful of individuals who are very afraid. They're very afraid, it seems, of people who are of the opposite political stance than they are. And so it is a very bizarre situation we're in as a country right now. Now, I'll go a bit further on this. This is Washington Mayor, again, Bowser. She's now saying she's worried about security threats to residential areas. Again, they've locked down the Capitol. If you look at maps of where you can actually go, it's quite limited, meaning that my reporting there is going to be probably very interesting. But she's saying now that she's also worried about security threats to residential areas. And remember, too, she's also saying that what they put into place right now is going to be the new norm. So new norm, not in concern beyond just the main, the main area where all the politicians are, but even going into the residential areas, maybe suggesting that she believes there should be additional security forces in the residential areas, which would possibly, we'll have to see what this really means in practice, but possibly mean more troops or possibly mean more police forces in these residential areas. And in addition to this, she said whatever happens now is going to be the new normal. Now, let's go further into this. Washington Mayor Muriel Bowser said that in addition to having security concerns focused on key parts of the city that directly relate to the January 20th inauguration of President-elect Joe Biden, she's also worried about potential threats to residential neighborhoods. And she said this on NBC's Meet the Press. She said, "I'm not concerned about other state capitals. I'm not only concerned about other state capitals, I'm also concerned about other parts of Washington, D.C." Now, Bowser was responding to a question by host Chuck Todd, who pointed out that much of the nation's capital has been converted into a, quote, fortress in the lead up to the inauguration, and asked, are you concerned that we're so secure in one place that they're going to find soft targets in other parts of the city? Talk about a leading question now. And she continues, Bowser said a range of agencies have been working to ensure that not only is the inauguration conducted safely, but that plans have been made to respond to potential threats in residential areas. So she's saying they've already made plans to secure residential areas. And she said this, quote, what you're showing is really the federal enclave of Washington, D.C., not where the 700,000 of us live. So our police department is working with our federal law enforcement partners, and the United States Army, quite frankly, also has a plan to pivot if we have any attacks in our neighborhoods. Now, we'll have to see how this goes going forward, but I've had Chinese friends comment that this is starting to look a whole lot like Beijing, where you have the Chinese Communist Party, essentially, and then you have enclaves, secure enclaves where CCP members and their families live, that the government is placed basically in a different part of the society than the rest of the people. This is starting to be what this looks like. Now, we'll have to see what it actually means in practice when she talks about this new normal. But it does seem to be the case that they have deputized military troops, and they've put into place more troops than we have in Afghanistan in the nation's capital, based on security threats that really were spread first by CNN, this alleged armed protests in 50 states, which they claimed based on sources that were not public that the FBI was warning about. And so this does seem to be the case, that CNN, one of the mainstream news outlets, was making noise about something based on what happened on January 6th, which increased concerns across the country that something was going to happen. They put more troops in place, so on. You often see this. This is a common tactic. It's above and below tactics, where you have, for example, media bang the drums, make noise, government responds to it, government can implement new policies and so on based on the noise the media drums up. And as they drum up more noise, the media covers the noise, enhance it, make it seem bigger, and then you can create nationwide panic. You can create, for example, an illusion, right? A Potemkin village, that something is happening that is really not as big of a deal as they say it is. Now, I'm not saying, again, I mean, maybe this FBI alert they had coming out that CNN reported on based on non-public sources, maybe that was the case. But based on I've been trying to find the source of all this stuff based on everything I've been seeing. It seems like most Trump supporters are in the opposite stance. They're saying, I ain't touching DC with a 20-foot pole right now. It seems to be that's the case. Because again, they're being targeted, they're being, singled out. You have the media hunting down people and shaming them. You have people, Antifa, for example, some of the people even I've interviewed saying that they're having threats to them and threats to their family members because, for example, they were at the events on January 6th. A lot of people are afraid right now that they're going to be targeted, and so they're keeping their heads low. It seems to be the opposite of what the media is trying to pump up. But again, it does bring into some questions of what the real story is here. Why do they feel the need to have such heavy security right now? If, again, the grassroots noise is not aligning with what the media is claiming it is. Maybe something else is at play, or maybe the media is drumming something up that is not really accurate, and government is reacting to that. Who knows? I'm just kind of giving some different points on this. Now let's see here. I'll do one more point on this, then I'll go into some questions. There's another Epoch Times story. It says federal prisons placed under full-on lockdown in light of current events, quote unquote, in light of current events. This is a strange one. It says here, federal prisons throughout the United States have been placed under full-on lockdown indefinitely, officials said. The Bureau of Prisons on January 16th announced, quote, temporary security measures to secure all 122 federal prison facilities in light of, quote, current events occurring around the country. The measures were implemented, according to BOP, the Bureau of Prisons, quote, out of an abundance of caution. Now, it isn't clear if the lockdown was initiated due to the inauguration day on January 20th or to the recent breach of the U.S. Capitol in Washington. The agency confirmed that operations were already limited due to the CCP virus, otherwise known as the novel coronavirus, which causes COVID-19. Tens of thousands of prisoners and thousands of prison staff members have contracted the virus over the past year. And remember, a lot of the governors, a lot of the mayors have been calling for prisons to basically be emptied out because of concerns allegedly of the virus. And again, ironically, before a lot of these large-scale BLM and Antifa protests that swept across the country, in New York, for example, and in California, we had some of the prisons get emptied out ahead of that. Now it seems to be that they're doing the opposite, although this is from the federal level, which is interesting because who knows who this is coming from. Now, going a bit deeper into this, the agency confirmed that operations were already limited again due to the CCP virus. And they said this in a statement, quote, in securing the facilities, the hope is that this prudent measure is for a short-term period and that operations will be restored to their prior status as soon as practical. We will continue to monitor events carefully and will adjust operations accordingly as the situation continues to evolve. Recognizing that communication with families is important, although it will be limited, inmates will be provided with access to telephones and email. Now, the measure is merely precautionary and wasn't prompted by any threats or information about potential threats, according to the federal agency. And the statement says this action is precautionary, and it is not in response to any significant events occurring inside our facilities, which brings to question why at this time are they doing this. And they continue, we appreciate everyone's cooperation and assistance during this period and encourage the public to monitor this website for updated information on visiting schedules and institution operations. Now, a bit more on this. Shane Fauci, president of the Council of Prison Locals, a union that represents about 30,000 prison employees, said the lockdown is prudent. This is what he said in a statement. He said the Bureau of Prisons and its professional federal law enforcement employees train for all types of conditions and ways to not only manage emergencies, but more importantly, to prevent serious incidents from occurring. Protecting our communities, the inmates entrusted in our care, and all of our employees that stand on the last line of defense is a responsibility that we do not take lightly. Now, again, it's unclear why they would be doing this. They're not being really forthcoming on why this is being done. If different states are talking about, for example, reopening restaurants and so on, like you have in Detroit and New York, they're discussing it again. And despite the fact that, again, you do have more cases of the virus, again, resurging again, why do this at this time if they didn't do it last time? And if they're concerned about something on Inauguration Day, what do the prisons have to do with this? Now, it's possible that they believe maybe the prisoners are going to riot. Maybe it's possible that they believe that whatever happens on Inauguration Day will enrage people or something like that, and they're going to riot. Maybe that's the reason. If that is the reason, they're not being clear on what the reason is. But you do have this increased security, full-on lockdown taking place in federal prisons across the country. And again, this is federal level, not state level, meaning that, again, it's not clear what the chain of command was on this, but it means that this is not a state decision, this is a federal decision, which is actually very, very strange. Hey, Jimmy Ling, thanks again. Wow. You said, heard that Arizona state legislatures may be proceeding with the full audit of the election irregularities in Maricopa County, including subpoena all the ballots and the voting machines, including arrest of any election official who refused to comply with the subpoena. I've been hearing that they're pushing for this. I'm not sure what the situation is currently. It seems a lot of people have kind of given up on some of this stuff, given the lawsuits and given everything else right now and the censorship. It's quite the complicated situation. Now let's go over a few questions and then I'll go over some more news stories. Let's see here. This is from Go Away A. He said, hi, Josh. Love your work. Appreciate it. He said, I've subscribed to the Epoch Times today. Are there any other news sources you think I should incorporate into my daily routine? To be honest, I mostly read Epoch Times and I watch Tiffany Meyer's Deep Dive. Those are my two main go-to places. Other than that, I use an RSS feed actually just for keyword searches. And RSS feed, I know people don't use RSS anymore, but I use an RSS feed for basically keywords I monitor, and I get a lot of my stories through that as well. And RSS, of course, will pull in anything regardless of what the news source is. And so I get a pretty broad view, including of international stories from that. Recommended Epoch Times. NTD is pretty good. Yeah, it's my personal favorites. Not to sound like I'm tooting my own horn here, but that's why I work for them. You know what I mean? I like the work they do. All right, next is Beth Coddington. You said, hi, Joshua. Do you think the rest of the world distrusts of China will influence Biden's decision to lift the sanctions Trump put in place? Actually, I've been discussing with some different analysts on this. And it will be interesting, actually, to see how Biden approaches this. Again, during the vice presidential candidate debates between Kamala Harris and Mike Pence, Harris was again criticizing Pence of Trump's policies on China, saying that his harsh stance on China had actually backfired. But it's going to be hard for Biden to actually undo the Trump policies on China without actually looking really bad, because Biden is again accused by many people of having, maybe some ties to China through Hunter Biden and his ties to China, which we can verify. And so it would not look good on him to just reverse all these policies. At the same time, because of the pandemic and because of the way the Chinese Communist Party was threatening different countries, including Australia, different parts of Europe, for when they were criticizing the CCP about withholding information on the virus, because again, you had this virus spreading. They told the world, lie after lie after lie, essentially. Refused to let inspectors go into China, refused to let them look into what the reservoir species was in terms of animal spread, meaning that until you dealt with these most basic parts of understanding where the virus came from, pretty much the world was left in the dark in terms of how to actually deal with it. Because if you had a species that was spreading the virus and the species was still out there, you're never going to get rid of the virus. And so, again, a lot of the world became very unhappy with the Chinese Communist Party. The Trump administration was leading the charge in terms of taking a harsher stance on the CCP, but that movement also took on a life of its own. Again, now you have Germany, Canada to an extent. I know the government has pretty close ties to the CCP as well, but they've had some spats with the CCP also. Australia, Japan, India joining the Quad Alliance with the United States against the CCP. Vietnam, of course, talking with the Philippines and other countries pushing back against the CCP. Most of Europe, a lot of Africa, very unhappy with it, and even some parts of Latin America starting to be unhappy with the way the One Belt, One Road initiative has basically got them stuck in debt traps. You have an international pushback against the Chinese Communist Party. Now, if the Biden administration starts to back off from that, the question is whether that will just be a U.S. policy shift or whether the whole world will follow the U.S. And honestly, given the national security interests of different countries and the way they've been pushing back against the CCP on their own, I actually don't think they'll follow the U.S. on that. And actually, this is going to be something very interesting. This is something we've seen come about with, for example, the big tech censorship happening in the United States right now, is that a lot of different countries, even including, as I mentioned before, foreign leaders who are by no means Trump fans, seem to be very unhappy about that. And what they're talking about now, for example, is starting up their own domestic tech infrastructure because they no longer trust the US-based tech infrastructure. And this is tying into something that's been going on for a long time. The United Nations, other groups, right? They've been concerned, and they've been voicing these concerns for a very long time about the monopoly of US tech companies over the high-tech infrastructure globally. And they can use what's happening now as basically a catalyst to act upon, to, for example, go against these different companies and to create their own, systems within their own countries. I actually do think that if Biden breaks too hard from some of Trump's policies that actually have had a good effect and have gotten the backing either in a pseudo grassroots way or directly of other countries. For example, India taking a very strong stance against the CCP. I actually think that you might see U.S. influence over some of these countries fade a little bit. I think this is a very big possibility, that you could see some of the U.S. influence over Europe, over India, over Japan. You could see them start to back off from the United States in terms of getting behind U.S. policy. And you could see other countries start to step more forward on the world stage. I think this is a real possibility. But we'll have to see. It's also possible that Biden will take a softer stance and so on. Yeah, and some of you mentioning too, like Citizen T Crusader, he said, Josh, Germany signed a contract with Huawei, I believe. This is the other reality too. A lot of countries are still very deeply intertwined with the CCP, regardless of all this. But remember, on a grassroots level, what's happened, right? On a grassroots level, how many people now know about slave labor camps in China? How many people now know that, again, they're using Muslim Uyghurs for slave labor? How many people now know about the organ harvesting in China? How many people watched what happened in Hong Kong and were concerned that the CCP basically threw out international law in terms of declaring full control over Hong Kong? How many people were aware of the lies the CCP told about the virus, disregarding the health of the world? I would say on a grassroots level, a lot of the world now is very much awake on what the CCP has done. They're very much awake on the nature of the debt traps of the Chinese Communist Party. They're very much aware of the way the CCP subverts political processes, uses different forms of influence operations to control academia, journalism, politics, you name it. And so, based in terms of public knowledge, it's harder for governments now to say go too hard against that without looking really bad themselves, that without looking like they sold out to the CCP essentially. And so this is one of the different trajectories we see in the world. Yeah, someone called it the Great Awakening. You have had an awakening of the public on a lot of issues that were lesser known before all this. This is from Lorraine M. Thank you for the support. You said, Joshua, thanks for the great reporting. Yeah, my pleasure. Do my best. You said, if Biden admin gets in, I am thoroughly worried about further infiltration of CCP across the actors across the federal government and military. Well, the Chinese Communist Party will act on that regardless of anything. The question is how weakened of a state are they in? The CCP right now is in a very weakened state. And again, I'm planning on exposing a lot of this going forward. When government isn't keeping this stuff in check, journalism can keep them in check. And so I do plan on focusing a lot on exposing CCP subversion going forward, because I think this is the biggest threat against the United States and many countries in the world. And so I will do my best to hold them accountable and to help continue this trajectory of letting the world know what has been happening with Chinese Communist Party subversion. Again, this has been kind of one of my biggest beats going back to 2008, and something I hope to continue. Hey, Adrian, the GRA, great. You said, thank you. You said, Josh, do you follow China Uncensored? Actually, yes, and actually I'm good friends with Chris Chappell. I'll just do one more question, then we'll go into the more stories for the night. This is from... It's from Andy Denial. You said, why is it called vetting when it's discrimination? Yeah, it's Newspeak, my friend. Right? Yeah, Newspeak, right? You can change the yeah, it's a political trick, right? You call something, you use language to manipulate the way something is perceived, basically. And there's different ways you can call something. You could call it discrimination. You could call it political discrimination, based on, again, discriminating against someone based on their political viewpoints. Although keep in mind, with the military, they're supposed to be loyal to the president of the United States, and so they're not supposed to criticize the president of the United States. Remember, like, General McChrystal, I think it was, the Rolling Stone did the story on him, and they said he was, like, drinking with his buddies. Remember the Black Ops guy? And Obama fired him because he criticized the Obama administration. A lot of people were unhappy about that, but technically in the military is not supposed to criticize the sitting president. Now, you could say Biden is not the sitting president, but he is the president-elect at this current time. And so technically they shouldn't be able to criticize him based on the law, but it's kind of weird that they're trying to vet people based on who they voted for in terms of choosing who is there, which is what is happening. Although the actual details of the vetting process aren't really being made clear to us. But we can look again at the concerns expressed by Biden over the Secret Service, over the military, that some of these guys might be loyal to Trump, and using that as part of the vetting process, we could assume, because that's the excuse being used for it. It is quite bizarre. Now, let's go on to a few more stories. Now, this is again Epoch Times. So Melania Trump actually put out a video today, which was, I watched it. It was very interesting. It was really just her giving thanks to everybody, saying it's been her joy to, serve the nation. And she goes over just saying thank you to people through most of the first half. And the second half is her calling for peace, telling people to not use violence. And she seems to be really trying to calm down the country and tell people to focus on unity, to focus on coming together, to focus on what unites us rather than what divides us. Now, I'll go over some of this. Now, it says, First Lady Melania Trump said in a farewell video released Thursday that serving in the position has been an honor. And she said, "My fellow Americans, it has been the greatest honor of my life to serve as First Lady of the United States. I've been inspired by incredible Americans across our country who lift up our communities through their kindness and courage, goodness and grace. This past 4 years has been unforgettable, to say the least." I won't go over this whole thing, but I'll move into some of what she said towards the end. She really just says thank you to people, talks about the good things she's seen in the American people and so on. And then she goes into, she says, in all circumstances, I ask this towards the end. She says, in all circumstances, I ask every American to be an ambassador of Be Best, to focus on what unites us, to rise above what divides us, to always choose love over hatred, peace over violence, and others before yourself. Together, as one national family, we can continue to be the light of hope for future generations and carry on America's legacy of rising our nation to greater heights through our spirits of courage, goodness, and faith. Now, she's trying, it seems she's, not only saying thank you, she also seemed to be really trying to cool down some of the tensions right now in the country. I do recommend watching the video. It's actually quite nice. Now, on that note, too, we'll have to see what happens. It is totally possible this time that Biden will be sworn in on January 20th. And Trump will then be, again, a private citizen. And Trump will have the rights of a private citizen once more, which could be a very interesting thing to watch as well. Not to mention a private citizen with a whole lot of money to do things within the private sector. And given the problems he's seen as president, there's actually quite a bit he could do. And it'll be very interesting to watch whether he maintains the same levels of support and influence that he currently has, how that will change what they're going to try to do with impeachment and so on, and possibly pressing charges, although it does seem the Democrats are starting to back off of that. We'll have to see. I'll give some details on that. And again, when it comes to this as well, I was talking to a friend about, maybe some guidance on how to deal with this type of stuff. And he said something interesting I was from Mencius, actually, one of the contemporaries of Confucius. Talks about political power and the idea of when you have power and when you don't have power. Basically, when you are not in power, focus on improving yourself. And if it comes to the time again that you do have what you need, what you want essentially in political power, then the act of self-refinement will make you better served within that role. And so during times of difficulty, just focus on self-improvement is the ancient wisdom on things like this. Again, though, difficult times, I think, for the nation right now, especially given the way that there's backlash against so many different independent voices right now, and against a lot of Americans as well. Now, let's go into some more stories. On the note of the impeachment, actually, this is interesting. Epoch Times story again. Democratic Senate whip says he won't recommend colleagues vote to convict Trump. The Senate's number 2 Democrat, again, this is a Democrat, not a Republican, said January 17th that he won't tell colleagues to vote to convict President Donald Trump on the charge of incitement of insurrection. And he said, we haven't whipped it. And again, this is from Dick Durbin, Democrat. And he said, we will, of course, try to find out how members feel, but in terms of arm twisting, when it comes to impeachment, you don't do that. Now, Durbin was speaking with CNN's State of the Union. And he said he agreed with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, a Republican, who reportedly told his caucus members that the upcoming vote will be a vote of conscience, as they're calling it. And Durbin continues, stating, quote, when it comes to an issue of this gravity and constitutional importance, members really have to follow their own conscience. It isn't a matter of saying, come on, the team has to all vote together. It just doesn't happen. And he continues, this is the 3rd time I will have sat through an impeachment trial. It's not happened in the previous 2 times, and I don't expect it will this time as well. So again, the reality, again, the House voted to impeach Trump just as they did last time. It's now going to the Senate. They need a two-thirds majority to get this passed. And they're going to be voting after Trump would technically be out of office, meaning that they would be trying to impeach a private citizen. Remember, this is why they couldn't impeach Richard Nixon, because Richard Nixon resigned before they could impeach him, meaning he was a private citizen, meaning they could not move forward with it. If they do vote to impeach Trump, regardless if he's a private citizen, that means that they'll be pretty much violating the Constitution in doing so. And also really further inciting people who are concerned about what's happening in the country right now. And in addition to this, if they try to go after him on criminal charges without hearing witnesses, without any normal systems of a fair trial, it does set a very terrible precedent. And, you know, we're seeing an interesting situation right now where other countries are watching this. Other countries, including, I keep mentioning Angela Merkel in Germany, because again, she has a lot of influence over the European Union, and they are by no means conservative. Right? Well, I guess they call themselves conservative party, but by American standards, they're pretty far left. And so people are watching what's happening right now, and they are voicing their concerns about the legitimacy of what they see happening. And again, concerned about what may be happening in the U.S. as it relates to their own security. If the U.S. is throwing out laws and regulations and normal procedures and court procedures in terms of political bias in cases like this, that does set a pretty terrible precedent, and also sets a pretty terrible standard for the rest of the world to watch. Again, this is the kind of stuff you see with banana republics, the type of thing that America would normally criticize if other countries were to have done it. And if they do move forward with this, it does not look good. And again, I think this will be one thing to watch for. I've mentioned before that it's possible the influence of the United States over the European Union, over Australia, over India, over Japan may begin to wane if officials in this country veer too far off the trodden path and start going their own way in terms of bypassing normal laws and procedures to do things. This will be something to watch for. Now, let's go a bit further into this and I'll get to some more questions. Some of you had asked, when would Kamala Harris resign her Senate seat? There's an update on this. Kamala Harris resigned Senate seat ahead of inauguration, so she's finally done it, or she's going to. Today. It was today. So Vice President-elect Kamala Harris submitted her resignation from her seat in the U.S. Senate on January 18th, 2 days before Inauguration Day. And she said this in her resignation letter. As I resign from the Senate, I am preparing to take an oath that would have me preside over it. As Senator turned Vice President Walter Mondale once pointed out, the vice presidency is the only office in our government that, quote, belongs to both the executive branch and the legislative branch. A responsibility made greater with an equal number of Democrats and Republicans in the Senate. Now, not much more to say on that. People were wondering when she would resign from the Senate because going back to Obama, when Obama, again, was a member of the Senate and then became president, he resigned pretty early on. And so people were questioning why Harris was waiting so long to resign. A bit more on this, some interesting shifts taking place. Some really interesting stuff happening. First off here, U.S. Census Bureau Director Stephen Dillingham retires as administration transitions. Says the director of the U.S. Census Bureau announced he is retiring from a long career with the federal government about a week after a whistleblower said he was pressuring Bureau officials to collect and report data on non-citizens before the January 20th transition. Again, Director Stephen Dillingham, a President Donald Trump appointee, said in a statement Monday that he is retiring from the Bureau on Wednesday, almost a year before his appointment expires, but added that his retirement was planned and not due to the whistleblower's complaint. Now, a bit more on this. You might remember that they had also given orders to basically not carry out the census in terms of not showing how many illegal immigrants there are in the United States, meaning that he seemed to have already been acting to a degree against the interests of Trump. And so it's interesting that just a couple days before the inauguration, he is resigning. And something else very interesting along these same lines. This is a statement from Nancy Pelosi's office. And it says here, Pelosi sends letter to Acting Defense Secretary Miller demanding halt to attempt to install unqualified NSA General Counsel candidate. Now, why is Trump installing a new head of the NSA right before leaving office? It says here, this is from Nancy Pelosi's office. This is a press release. It says here, Speaker Nancy Pelosi sent a letter late yesterday to Acting Department of Defense Secretary Christopher C. Miller, demanding an immediate halt to the improper process of installing unqualified, according to her, Trump loyalist Michael Ellis as the new National Security Agency General Counsel, 72 hours prior to the beginning of the new administration. Again, this is from Nancy Pelosi's website. Now, in the letter, the Speaker wrote, public reporting indicates that Mr. Ellis, a relatively recent law school graduate with limited resume, was selected due to interference by the White House and was chosen over much more qualified candidates. Moreover, Mr. Ellis has been reportedly involved in highly questionable activities that are disqualifying, including the infamous 2017 midnight run to launder intelligence information through Representative Devin Nunes, and with the efforts to shield information about President Trump's July 2019 call with the president of Ukraine. Issues that were arguable depending on which side of the political spectrum you were on, of course. Now, she continues, the NSA General Counsel, which involves supervising many intelligence community attorneys and interacting with intelligence agencies, is a highly sensitive career position for which candidates are selected based on merit and free from political influence. And she continues, if Mr. Ellis did go through the transitional civil service hiring process, I request a detailed account of that process to understand how someone with his credentials was chosen over other qualified candidates. I won't go over the complete letter on this, but there's some interesting parts in this. First of all, why is Trump, with only 72 hours left in office, installing a new head of the NSA? It could also bring up questions of why he did similar things with the Department of Defense and the Department, I believe, of Homeland Security, and tying in as well with the weird lockdown they have at the prisons, and tying in as well with some of the other strange incidents we've been seeing, the say, extreme situation of paranoia in Washington being among them. Now, one thing Pelosi mentions in here, the NSA General Counsel, not NSA specifically, which involves supervising many intelligence community attorneys and interacting with intelligence agencies, is a highly sensitive career position in which candidates are selected, she said. Now, a position which involves supervising many intelligence community attorneys, meaning that maybe something is happening on the legal side of this with the attorneys of the NSA, possibly involved in some kind of monitoring operation, given the types of operations NSA normally carries out. Now, it is important to note NSA typically is foreign monitoring. CIA tends to be foreign as well. FBI is more domestic, although, as we saw with Edward Snowden and the Crossfire hurricane investigations, that line of not monitoring U.S. citizens has been quite badly broken. Right, let's call it what it is. This is again something that we don't really know what the heck is going on with this, but it is very strange. With it just 72 hours left in office, Trump has chosen to do this. It is a very strange appointment if Trump is leaving office, unless there's something more to it, but who knows? Now, one more interesting story here, then I'll go over some more questions. This is from Politico. It says here, FBI investigating whether woman stole laptop from Pelosi's office to sell it to Russia. And they're saying the Pennsylvania woman was seen in footage near Pelosi's office January 6th. Remember that story again of how Nancy Pelosi's laptop was stolen? They are alleging, and this is nothing but an allegation right now, that the person who stole it may be trying to sell it to Russia, which means that this is not just a criminal offense, but a national security offense, we should assume now as well. In terms of how they are investigating it, it's unclear what evidence they have of that, but let's go over the story just a bit. It says the FBI, this is Politico, right? It says the FBI is investigating evidence that a woman who entered the Capitol on January 6th stole a laptop or hard drive from Speaker Nancy Pelosi's office and intended to sell it to Russians. The bizarre claim, which the FBI emphasized remains under investigation, was included in an affidavit describing the criminal case against Riley June Williams, a Pennsylvania woman who was seen in footage of the January 6th insurrection in the area of the Capitol near Pelosi's office. And it's not clear if the FBI has been able to apprehend her, meaning this woman who has allegedly the laptop or hard drive of Nancy Pelosi is very likely still on the run. Now, according to the affidavit, it says this. It appears that Williams has fled. It was signed, posted public after 9 p.m. It says, quote, according to law enforcement officials in Harrisburg, Williams's mother stated that Williams packed a bag and left her home and told her mother she would be gone for a couple of weeks. Williams did not provide her mother any information about her intended destination. Now, based on this, it's unclear whether Russia in this case is actually Russia, or Russia in this case is Russia in terms of the, basically Newspeak punching bag of anything regarding Trump. It is very interesting, though, that the woman who stole this has left somewhere for possibly a couple weeks with possibly highly sensitive information. Now, is she really delivering it to Russia? That is merely the claim of Politico and does not seem to be, and of Pelosi, we can assume, and is not to be something that is proven yet. And so it's really not clear who she is delivering this laptop and or hard drive to. But you do have this woman, allegedly, she's being accused, right, innocent till proven guilty, of stealing this laptop and is traveling somewhere with it to deliver it to someone. And the FBI is treating this now as very likely a national security case because of the accusation she may be trying to hand it to Russians. Another weird anomaly within this very long string of weird anomalies we've been watching. All right, folks, let's go over a few questions and then I'll get to some more stories if we have time. Let's see here. It's from... This is, one sec. Oh, real quick as well. Remember what happened today as well. The inauguration rehearsal was canceled briefly today. It was evacuated. Capitol's temporarily shut down after a fire under the freeway. If any of you saw the video of this, you had loudspeakers blaring warnings, get away from windows, stay locked down essentially. You had loudspeakers in Washington today blaring out warnings to everybody to basically stay where you are, hunker down, and so on. That there was allegations of small arms fire. Small arms being a military term, it could mean rifles, even RPGs, rocket-propelled grenade launchers, right, would technically be small arms. In other words, a pretty broad spectrum of weapons. They were saying there was a suspected small arms fire and so on. It turned out, allegedly, that it was because some homeless people set a fire underneath one of the bridges, and they saw the smoke from that, and they put the city on high alert. Again, ending the rehearsal for the inauguration. And so very strange incidents today. At the very least, very high paranoia, which was set off by a homeless encampment and a fire they had at the homeless encampment. There were videos of that at this point. Frankly, I'm having trouble taking as absolute truth any kind of narrative coming out right about now, but this is what we were shown. This is from Sharon Quindy. You said, how can we stay informed as to President Trump's event on Wednesday? I will not be watching the inauguration. Epoch Times we're trying to get a reporter to go there and report on it. It's not clear whether other media are going to report on it, so do tune in. We will have that hopefully on our website, theepochtimes.com. Hopefully we can have it on YouTube, although the way they've been censoring, we'll have to see whether they keep it up or not. We'll try to keep you all updated on that. This is from I'm All Out of Bubble Gum. A great reference to the movie They Live. He said E6B Mercury is in the alt-right now. Is it? I'm not sure what this is, to be honest. Is in the air right now. I'm sorry. Oh, you said E6B Mercury is in the air right now. I'm sorry. What is that? The stealth bomber, right? Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Flight of Boeing E6B Mercuries amid Trump's coronavirus announcement, purely coincidental, according to Strategic from Command. This is very interesting. Sorry, this is from October. I'll look into it more and get back to you on that. That would be very interesting, though. I did see some reports that there were flights of a U.S. bomber over Iran right now, or near Iran, because of trying to let them know that they are still being watched, and U.S. military forces are still in place. They try anything, but I'll look into that. It's from Jerome Taylor. You said, I heard at the presidential airport Trump's having a 21 gun salute before he leaves, possibly cannons. That would be very interesting. Well, we'll see if he does it. That would be almost like a mourning, and it will be interesting. Trump is actually allegedly going to, I believe, a military base as part of his process of leaving, which is also a very interesting choice. Propaganda Panda, good to see you as always. He said, keep up the great work, Joshua. Hey, my pleasure. Do my best. He said, if the censorship gets worse, can we do Q&A via carrier pigeons? Yeah. It might have to go old tech, old school tech. He said, question, PayPal in China now. I saw PayPal allegedly under almost full ownership of the CCP. Should users abroad be concerned? Well, the Chinese Communist Party has Alipay under Alibaba, which is like their PayPal clone. It's interesting that they're trying to control PayPal as well, meaning that the CCP has broader control over digital currencies, which is one of the big things they are trying to push right now. I believe Facebook, I think it is also trying to launch something similar to this, last I've heard. And we'll have to see whether that gets approved in the United States, which would be very interesting because it would mean the U.S. would, in some ways, be following that same trajectory of the CCP in terms of switching over somewhat to digital currency. And this could be part of the build back strategy from the virus that the CCP is pushing. Is from Jimmy Lee again. Thank you. He said, is it better that Trump should let Biden to take office and let the people see how the illegitimate government run the country to the ground to awake those who support these governments? I'd say it's based on your political viewpoints in terms of what is best for the country with this. Yeah, I don't know. Is it better to have this or to have Trump again, and especially given the current times? It's hard to say because Trump, really, Trump never really had the support of the Democrats, right? We've had a divided nation for the past 4 years, anyways, and very likely, unless Biden really does something to quell concerns of conservatives and Republicans, he's not going to have their support either. And if they're silencing them, eliminating their ability to communicate online from the big tech side, it is a very concerning situation in terms of how people can communicate with each other, how information can be spread, and what that means for people who feel that they are voiceless, essentially. One of the most basic rights we have, something constitutionally protected, right? Freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of belief. And these three things are under assault right now. We'll have to see what happens with this. Hopefully, I think if Biden were to come out and say, okay, we need to protect the Constitution, and big tech and the oligarchies of big tech need to cool it down, that'd be a good thing, I think. But we'll have to see whether he takes that stance. And I think nothing less than that is going to make conservatives less concerned about things right now. I'll go over a couple more questions real quick. It's from Hector Tulio de Almeida Almagro. You said, who called 25,000 guards to D.C., Trump or Biden? Actually, it was the declaration of emergency was issued by Trump, which is very interesting. It's unclear who called for the increasing a number of troops there, but the emergency declaration actually came from Trump. This is interesting, which could be part of why maybe Biden is concerned about the political viewpoints of the troops now stationed in Washington. It's a very bizarre situation, but at the same time, it does seem to be a situation that the Democrats seem to support, even though it did partly come from Trump. It is a very bizarre situation, actually. You're continuing. You said CNN is now calling for the removal. Sorry, this is from Beth Coddington. Beth Coddington said CNN is now calling for the removal of conservative news media like OANN and Newsmax, along with other YouTube channels that reach more people. They fear the spread of truth, but call it disinformation. From a business standpoint, these companies smell blood right now, and they're using this as a catalyst, it seems, to go after their competitors. There's propaganda, there's PR, right? There's public relations in terms of making your company look good. There's also black PR, where you want to make your competitors look bad. And these companies right now are latching onto the political situation and political narratives, and then working hand in hand with each other to basically kill rising competition that are eating away their market shares. That does seem to be the case of what's happening right now. A terrible precedent, and something that the government right now is not condemning the way I believe they should. That essentially big tech oligarchy, and what you should watch the interview we published today about technocracy, this socialist system instituted by big business, because this is what these companies are basically displaying, the same type of powers of a technocracy, which was a popular socialist ideology going back to the 1930s. Check out the interview I did on this today. Now, very briefly on this, socialism is often deeply misunderstood as just being an economic system, but socialism can really work through any kind of large-scale control of power, right? A large-scale system or a monopoly of a power center, which can use that power to carry out operations to lead a country or a people down the path towards a communist vision. Right? It is a system of power influenced essentially by a communist worldview. And so socialism isn't always against big business and so on, even though that's the narrative often used for it. Corporations themselves can, through their monopolies, carry out socialist policies, which was the narrative of the technocracy movement. And you can go into the syndicalist movement, where it's through the unions. There was military socialism. There was all kinds of brands of socialism during the time of Marx and in the early 1900s. But now these different socialist movements have basically taken on new lives of their own, and they no longer call themselves socialist, essentially. Do check out the interview on this. We go deep into it. All right, folks, I'll do a couple more questions and I'll call it tonight because it's getting quite late. This is from Mary Wood. You said, Josh, you're the right guy for investigative journalism. Appreciate it. He said, Ari, Wall Street controlling IPOs for the very rich, leaving scraps to regular folks, efforts to improve retirement funds. Dems want to destroy Social Security. Yeah, well, I'm not a fan of the Federal Reserve. In fact, I helped at Epoch Times put together a very large special report on the Federal Reserve, how fiat currencies work, how debt traps work, how debt slavery works, which is one of the main functions of a lot of the systems of finance we have in the US, whether it be the hidden tax of inflation, whether it be the way that banks can basically create their own money through the loan system, whether it be the way that federal loans work through the school system to make unpayable debts for students who get jobs they can never really earn a living on to pay back the loans they are given. I would say the financial systems in this country are terribly, terribly corrupt. And can go on and on about that. Let's see here. Freedom, Love, and Fool. Again, thank you. You said, Josh, be careful in D.C. Yeah, don't worry. I think D.C. has more troops in it than Afghanistan right now. I do think it's going to be pretty safe. But I will be careful. And I will be with Michael Yon doing some reporting there. Again, he's a wartime journalist, right? Combat journalist. You said, I believe the deep state will stage an event, Operation Northwood style, which will serve to take our rights away. I suspect something with a bomb or ARs will be staged. We'll have to see. You know, the way that some of these individuals are behaving with what's happening in Washington right now, the way that the environment right now is so opaque in terms of information, the way that we've seen some very strange behavior of some previous protesters, and the way that news is being trumped up of these armed protests and no one can figure out where the origin of those rumors are. All of this does suggest that there's some very strange things happening in the country right now. And it's unclear who is behind them or what the intention of these is, or if it's just people trying to stir up, you know, chaos or something like that. I will be careful, though. Yeah, thank you. All right, just a couple more questions here. Hector Tulio, you said, what are the odds that troops are there for a massive treason arrest for all the November cheating? To be honest, nothing would surprise me at this point. But we'll have to see. Your guess is as good as mine in terms of what will happen on January 20th. Again, the situation right now, the number of weird anomalies right now, the amount of concern and panic in Washington and panic among even big tech and big media is very bizarre. And Trump seems to be very quiet at this time as well. And so we're not getting much in terms of where he stands in terms of what's happening. And yeah, it's a very bizarre, very strange situation for the country. And I could see, if no matter what happens, I probably will not be surprised. Let's put it that way. It is very possible, too, that Biden will just go through a normal inauguration and Trump will become a private citizen. And the U.S. will be in a very different situation. But it will be also a situation that will be interesting to watch as it develops. And of course, I'll be continuing doing what I'm doing, regardless of what happens. Jimmy Ling. Thank you again. Wow. You said we need to weaken these corrupt career elite politicians through, I can't say that, make Trump position more stronger as more evidence will eventually prove to be correct. You know, we'll have to see, right? You know, of course, what you're suggesting is that these politicians, by overstepping their legal boundaries on things and possibly showing their hands by doing so, may have killed their own careers. You do see some of this happening right now, especially with conservatives who Republicans believe have betrayed them. You do have this. And again, you'll have to see what it means as well with, you know, say stories coming out, or even if Trump decides to declassify information, which is one of the big Trump cards, pun not intended, that could happen as well, that Trump could try to declassify a lot of information, and that could, if the Justice Department does not move to prosecute based on what we see, at the very least cause a lot of Americans to become aware of what has been happening in this country. A lot of things could happen. All right, last question for the night. You say Penumbra Shadow. You said Oliver Cromwell is what they're afraid of, which is why no one knows who he is. I have to look into that because I don't know who he is, to be honest. All right. Thank you, everyone. And again, I'm typing that in. And again, folks, I'm going to be in Washington the next few days doing reporting. I will get back to you in terms of what's happening there, give you some eyes on the ground as things go forward. And again, with the inauguration in Washington, the Trump events happening in Florida, be trying to get you information on that as well. It's difficult times for us, difficult times for the country, difficult times for the freedom of information and the freedom of speech. But again, given the situation of relative information blackout, I'll be doing my best to get you all this. Hey, Jimmy again, thank you. Wow. You said socialism, progressivism, and communism are just fancy words for Marxism, which is absolute power and control for others. This is true. And he said again, yeah, it's true. Well, communism existed, socialism and communism existed as ideas even during the time of Marx, but Marx did, let's say, turn it into an ideology that did not have to debate with people who stood against it, and he perfected it. You could say it's true. Communism and socialism these days both tie to Marxism. And really, this is the underlying fuel for this whole ideology. All right, folks. Anyways, again, I will be continuing to report, as always, regardless of what happens. And actually, I want to do a whole lot more going forward on CCP subversion, because I think this is going to be one of the biggest stories going forward, not just in the US, but around the world. And again, focusing on the biggest stories where we find them. Now, as always, folks, again, please take care of yourselves. Tune in again tomorrow night, 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time. I will try to have a live broadcast. I will be doing some reporting in Washington, and so hopefully I'll be back in time to do the live broadcast. If not, again, we have lots of other footage coming out, lots of other shows coming out, lots of good interviews coming out. But we'll let you know. I should be again here 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow. That said, folks, as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.